Hello and welcome to the Nomies and the Surface Protocol. I'm its author, Erik Gingles, and I'm in the book with my kids and wife, Caroline, and this is a story that started about 18 years ago when I was telling this as a bedtime story for our girls, just to make it up each night. They wanted to have a story where they were the central characters, and so I began creating a story each night, making it up as I went along, but after a while, it just became a little too complicated to continue, so I had to stop it. And then maybe 4 years ago, I picked it up and thought, you know what? I'm going to write this all down, and I did. And this is the end result, the Nomies and the Surface Protocol. If you haven't heard of it, I hope that you'll enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to reading it to you. So let's begin with the prelude. The house moved. At least the 12-year-old thought the house moved. The red glowing numbers on her bedside clock read 4:18 in the morning. She blinked a few times and yawned. The small nightlight globe on the edge of her desk looked fuzzy through her sleepy eyes. She rubbed them with the back of her hands and things came into focus. Kate looked around and in the dim light, everything seemed as it should be. The world map, where she put pins in all the cities that she had visited so far, was on the wall. Her taekwondo trophies were still standing. She turned to the Beyoncé poster next to her bed and mumbled, "What do you think, B?" The poster was silent. She muttered, "I must have dreamt it." With another yawn, Kate rolled over, kicked off her comforter, and closed her eyes. No sooner had she drifted back to sleep than her little globe light started to vibrate, just ever so slightly, and the dog next door let out a low, rumbling growl. Chapter 1. Kate, Abbie, Sarah, and School. The large black SUV did not belong on this quiet street. It was the kind with dark windows used by security people, and it stood out like a sore thumb in front of the slightly tired-looking red brick Besborough School. The vehicle was wedged in among the smaller cars whose drivers were looking for a bit of shade under the maple trees on this hot June afternoon. The occupants of the SUV weren't concerned about the heat, though. They had bigger things on their minds. Both wore a serious expression. Both wore very dark sunglasses, the kind welders wear, and both were silent. The big man in the passenger seat scanned the street up and down. Meanwhile, the driver, a very athletic woman with spiky silver-white hair, was focused on the two girls who were waiting for the bus in the heat of the schoolyard. The older girl was kicking at the ground, her back angled towards her sister. Trying a little too hard to ignore whatever it was that her sister was doing. The younger girl dropped down and picked up a handful of dirt. "Hey, Kate, think fast." She pretended to throw the dirt at her, causing Kate to stumble backwards. A few older kids looked over and grinned, shaking their heads, and then looked away. "Really, Abbie?" Kate said, reaching around to straighten her ponytail, her voice not coming out quite. "Really, Abbie?" Kate said, reaching around to straighten her ponytail, her voice not coming out quite as flat as she had hoped. "Smarten up." "Oh, come on," Abbie replied, looking over at the other kids. "Who cares what they think?" Though she would never admit it, Kate wished she had more of her sister's confidence. Differences aside, it was easy to tell the two girls were sisters. For one, they had the same amount of freckles, or as their mom liked to call them, angel kisses. Abbie brushed the rest of the dirt off her hands when she suddenly pointed down the street. The woman in the dark SUV stiffened and followed Abbie's finger with her gaze. She tightened her grip on the wheel. "Hey, that's Sarah," Abbie cried. Kate looked to wherever her sister was pointing, and sure enough, she could see the little blonde pigtails and freckled face of her younger sister peering through the window of the approaching school bus. "What's she still doing on the bus?" Abbie asked. "I don't know." "She probably forgot to get off." "Sarah." Abbie shook her head and grinned. She liked the thought of someone else getting into trouble with her parents rather than her. Sarah was the youngest of the three girls and in grade 2. She talked a lot, had a great imagination, and loved to play with anything smaller, bigger, or the same size as herself, and she loved her sisters equally. Kate, Abbie said as they waited for the bus to pull up, her voice now becoming a little quieter. What? Didn't you think Mom was acting a little weird this morning? Kate thought for a moment. Yeah, she agreed. She gave me a container of hummus, but no pita bread, and my milk container was empty. And what about that Abbie dropped her voice to sound like an adult robot, then pretended to grab an imaginary child by the shoulders. You girls have to look after each other. You have to stick together. Abbie started to laugh. What was that all about? She picked up a small rock and threw it unsuccessfully at the fence post by the school. But Kate didn't find their mom's behavior as funny as Abbie did. Their mother was definitely acting weird, but weirder still was that their dad hadn't come to the school bus stop with them that morning. She couldn't remember a time when he hadn't. Their mom said he wasn't feeling well, but, he never got sick. Kate couldn't explain it, but she had a feeling deep down that something wasn't right, and that feeling had been growing all morning. Now, Lori, Sarah's afternoon bus driver, eased the big yellow vehicle up to the curb and yanked the door open with the pull of the lever. Kate and Abbie knew Lori. She used to be their bus driver when they were Sarah's age. Hi, girls. Boy, have you ever grown, Lori said. How was the year? Great, Abbie and Kate replied with a smile. Lori smiled back. The girls liked Lori for a number of reasons, but especially because she always smelled like fresh bread. I stopped in front of your house, but your mom was not there, so I had little Miss Sarah stay and keep me company on my route. Right, Sarah? Sarah nodded, but she didn't say anything. She got up and went down the steps to join her sisters, with Lori right behind her. Katie, Mummy wasn't there. Where is she? I don't know, said Kate. She didn't say anything to me about going anywhere. Well, said Lori, I will go tell the office that Sarah stayed on the bus with me and is going home with you. I am sure when you get back, your mom will be there. Lori glanced at the dark SUV across the street. She hesitated for a second, then turned back, smiling at the girls. She gave Sarah a little rub on the arm and walked towards the school, her blonde ponytail swinging back and forth through the hole in her ball cap. Lori wasn't very tall, and the girls didn't know if she was in her 30s or 50s. It was hard to tell with those dark sunglasses she always wore. The girls could hear her pop bubble with her chewing gum as she entered the building. The thick aluminum door clanked hard behind her, sounding louder than normal in the still heat of the afternoon. Katie, why wasn't Mummy home? Sarah asked again. Probably because you were being a little churd, Abbie said, taking the opportunity to have a little dig. I'm telling Mom, Sarah said, and jabbed Abbie hard with her thumb. Ow, Sarah! Why did you do that? That really hurt. Not long ago, their dad had taught them by pushing their thumbs on certain spots of the body they could bring a person down to their knees. Their mother was not impressed because once they knew how to do it, the only people they brought down were each other. Abbie went to return the favor, but Sarah quickly moved behind Kate. Okay, you two, stop it. Kate's face was starting to feel hot again under the looks from the other kids. Abbie was trying to get around Kate, but Sarah kept putting Kate between herself and Abbie, using her older sister as a shield. Stop it! Kate yelled as she swung around suddenly, knocking Sarah into Abbie and causing them both to fall backwards into a pile of kids and book bags. This made Abbie laugh, but Sarah mad. Kate's face flushed red as everyone turned to look. Both of you, stop it! You're both being turds. I'm telling Mommy you called us turds, Sarah shouted. Keep it down, Kate hissed again, looking around. I didn't say turds. I said you both should use your words. You did not. Yeah, Abbie said. You most definitely said turds. Whatever, Kate said, rolling her eyes and trying to end the conversation. Bus, Abbie pointed down the street. All three girls swung their bags onto their backs and lined up to get on with the rest of the kids. This group was much taller than what Sarah was used to, and she stayed close to Kate, trying to take her hand, but Kate shrugged her off. Sarah, it's fine. Just get on the bus, Kate said without looking at her little sister. Yeah, Sarah, Abbie said more softly. It's no big deal. Abbie reached out and took Sarah by the hand, who gratefully squeezed it tightly as she followed her sisters onto the bus. The driver of the dark SUV reached out to put the engine into gear and follow. Her body was tense, ready for what might come next. She licked her tight lips without realizing it. She was a fighter, and she was pretty sure she was going to get one. But before she could make a move, she felt a hand on her wrist. It was the man in the passenger seat. He motioned forward with his head. Looking up, the driver saw that a police car had pulled up in front of them, blocking their way. A dark SUV with tinted windows, sitting outside the neighborhood school for most of the day, hadn't gone unnoticed. Now there was an officer approaching her door and another coming up on the passenger side. The driver ground her teeth and gripped the wheel even harder. Chapter 2. Katie, Abbie, Sarah, home. Abbie and Sarah shared a seat and chattered all the way home. Kate sat across from them and stared out the window. Something wasn't right. When she woke up in the middle of the night, she could just feel it. The closer the bus got to their house, the more she felt it. As the bus rounded on their street, a long shudder ran from the top of Kate's neck down to her toes, and she swallowed hard. Stopping across the street in front of their house, the driver swung the door open, and the three girls filed down the steps. After the bus passed in front of them, Sarah and Abbie stepped off the curb, but Kate reached out and grabbed them by their backpacks. "Wait," she said. Their home was a Cape Cod-style house. It wasn't big, but it was cozy and filled with love. It had a brick front with 3 dormer windows on the second floor. Their property sat on a long, curving corner, giving them a big front lawn and a small backyard. The girls like to say that they lived in a giant piece of pizza with a sidewalk crust. They lived there all their lives, learning to climb the 2 towering maple trees on the front lawn. That was one of the nice things about their neighborhood, all the trees, especially the maples with their rough gray bark. But the best thing was that right across the street, there's a big park full of trails and creeks to explore. Looking at their house, Kate noticed 2 things that seemed odd. Both cars were in the driveway, when there was usually only one, and it was quiet, really quiet. No birds, no lawnmowers, no wind, no sound, Kate said under her breath. She could feel Abbie take her one hand and Sarah the other. She didn't shrug them off this time. Together they stepped off the curb and crossed the street. They walked to the bottom of the front steps and stopped. "Katie?" Sarah said in a small voice. "Yeah?" "I'm not going to tell Mommy you said we were turds." "Yeah, okay, thanks." "Katie?" she said again, but even in a smaller voice. "What, Sarah?" Kate was getting a little agitated. "Why is the front door open?" Sure enough, the heavy wooden door was slightly ajar. Kate looked over at the driveway. Both their parents' cars were there, so they had to be home. It's okay," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "Let's go." That's all Abbie needed to hear. Brushing past Kate, she bounded up the stairs and pushed open the door and burst into the front entranceway, dropping her school bag to the floor with a loud thwump. "Mom!" she yelled. "We're home!" Kate flinched. "Keep it down," she whispered to her sister. "Mom?" Kate called out half-heartedly, looking around. "Mommy," Sarah chimed in a bit louder. "What's that smell?" Abbie was wrinkling her nose. It was earthy, kind of like the smell when they would help their mother dig in the flower beds each spring. It almost had a taste to it. Kate glanced up the stairs, hoping to hear the familiar creak of her parents' footsteps. Nothing. She peered down the hallway in front of her. The thick, dark curtains that shielded the back of the house against the hot afternoon sun were being sucked in and out through the opening of the sliding doors. "The deck doors are open. They must be on the back deck then," Abbie said, and started down the hallway. "Wait!" Kate had a feeling that drawing any attention to the presence in the house was not a good idea. Not hearing, or more likely just ignoring, her older sister, Abbie marched down the hallway to the open door, making a lot of noise for someone so slight, and pulled the curtains back. Kate and Sarah could see her silhouette in the doorframe, just standing there, not moving. "Abbie!" Kate hissed, looking around nervously. Her sister didn't respond. "Abbie!" Kate walked towards her sister with Sarah in tow. Standing in the doorway, looking out into the backyard, Kate was momentarily blinded by the hot, bright sunlight. She could hear a low thrumming sound coming from somewhere. Her eyes adjusted to the light. "What the?" she said, barely above a whisper. Their entire deck, lawn furniture, gazebo, laundry rack, and even the tetherball set had all been replaced with a big black hole that took up most of their little backyard. And the hole was clearly not dug by a shovel. There was no sign of the dirt anywhere, no clumps of earth or mud with a worker's footprints. It was as if a massive cookie cutter had just punched down deep into the ground and come back up to carry the earth away somewhere else, leaving this smooth, deep hole. Sarah broke the silence. "Maybe Mummy fell in the hole." She leapt from the doorframe towards the edge of the hole, desperate to see if her mom was indeed somewhere down there. "No, Sarah!" Kate grabbed the back of her sister's collar before she could get any closer. "Mummy's not down there. She's probably over at the LeBlancs talking to Heather. You know how Mummy likes to talk sometimes." Then she said, "Stay here." Kate crouched down on all fours and inched her way forward. The thrumming sound was definitely coming from the hole. So was a warm breeze. "What do you see?" chorused Abbie and Sarah together. "Nothing, but there's a wind coming up from the hole. It's warm." The other two lay flat on their bellies and wiggled their way towards their older sister until they could see over the edge of the hole, too. Just like Kate said, there was a warm breeze coming up from the darkness below, and they could hear the faint thrumming sound being carried up on the gentle draft of air. "What do you think's down there?" Abbie asked. "I don't know," Kate replied, wondering the same thing. "Do you think Mummy and Daddy fell down there?" Sarah asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because." "Because why?" "Just because, okay? Mummies and daddies just don't fall down holes." "Okay," Sarah said quietly, looking sad and afraid. Man, maybe for some reason their parents were down there. Maybe they were stuck on a ledge and hurt and unable to call out. I mean, that seemed unlikely, but then again, how likely is it to have a never-ending hole suddenly appear in your backyard? Kate decided to put her little sister at ease. "Look, I'll go down there and check," she said, her voice sounding loud in the quiet of the backyard. "What?" Abbie cried. "It'll be okay. I'll just go down a little bit to see if I can see anything. All I need to do is put the garden hose over the side, and then I can slide down on that a bit and easily climb back up, just like summer camp." Camp was a knotted rope, Katie, and you could hardly do it. "Yeah, well, I'm not going that far down, and you guys can help pull me up." "I don't know, Katie. I'm scared." Sarah was clinging onto Abbie. "Well, let's see if we can tell how deep it is first," Abbie suggested. And with that, she picked up a small stone from the edge of where the deck used to be and dropped it over the side. They waited, ears tilted towards the hole. But even after what seemed like a few minutes, there was no sound of the rock hitting the bottom. "That seems pretty deep," Abbie said. "Yeah," Kate agreed. "Okay, you go down on the hose a little bit just to see if you can see anything down there, and then we'll help pull you up." Sarah didn't say anything. All right, I'll go," Kate said with more determination than she felt. Within a few minutes, the girls had fed the hose into the darkness. Kate gave it a few good yanks to make sure it was well secured to the house. "Now, when I say so, you guys pull me up when I climb, okay?" "Okay," Abbie and Sarah said together. Kate got down on her hands and knees at the edge of the hole and let her eyes adjust to the darkness below. Taking a deep breath in, she grabbed the hose with both hands and began inching her way over the edge, wrapping the hose around one of her ankles as she lowered herself down. She stopped, eyes barely level with the ground. "Now you guys pull when I say pull, right?" Kate's face was tight. Her sisters nodded. "Katie," Sarah was starting to panic at her sister's head disappearing. "It's okay, Sarah. I'm just going to go a little farther." Very slowly, Kate slid the hose through her hands, making sure the part wrapped around her ankle would stop her if she sensed it with her other foot. Now that she was over the side and a few feet down from the top, the breeze in the hole felt stronger. It made Kate's hair fly around, covering her face and blocking her view of what was below. It also distracted her from noticing that she had gone much farther down than she had planned. She stopped. Looking up, her sisters' faces at the edge of the hole seemed alarmingly small. They were shouting something, but at this depth she couldn't make it out. She looked around. Fear started to creep up her arms. She'd gone way too far. "Pull me up!" Kate shouted as she struggled to climb. She still couldn't hear her sisters, which meant they probably couldn't hear her either. "Pull me up!" she shouted again and grabbed farther up the hose. "It looks like she's coming up," Abbie said. "Hurry, Sarah." Sarah and Abbie grabbed the hose and leaned backwards as hard as they could, digging their heels into the grass, inching their sister up bit by bit. "She says I'm fat," Abbie grunted between pulls. It was hard going. Neither of them had much weight to leverage, and they were straining hard for every inch of hose they could pull out of the hole. "Hello, girls." The voice was cold. Abbie and Sarah froze. In unison, they turned their freckled faces to see who was behind them, their hands still locked on the hose, both still leaning back. A man and a woman stood in the open doorway. Both wore light blue suits with white shirts. One had a thin black tie, the other a thin blue tie. They both wore thick sunglasses, and their hair was cut short, close to their heads. They were smiling, but they weren't nice smiles. Abbie and Sarah felt a chill run down their spines. "What are you doing?" the man said, not changing the grin on his face. Sarah took in a breath to speak, but Abbie nudged her with her elbow and spoke first. We're just trying to see how deep this hole is." "Really?" the woman with the thin blue tie said slowly. Yeah," Abbie said, not very convincingly. "Why?" "Ugh, just something to do." "But what about Katie?" Sarah blurted out. "Katie?" "Sarah." Abbie shot her younger sister a hard glance. "Sarah? That is a nice name," the man with the thin black tie said. He looked over at the woman and smiled. Sarah didn't like the way he said her name. "I do not think you have to worry about Katie," the black tie man said. "Why?" Abbie asked. "Because she's not hanging around." And with that, he closed the distance from the door to the hole in less than 2 seconds. The girls almost didn't see him move, but they did see the glint of sunlight in a large knife. It was curved with intricate markings. The man scooped the sharp blade under the hose and brought it up in one quick motion, cutting the hose like a hot knife through butter. Abbie and Sarah fell to the ground in a heap once the tension in Kate's dangling weight was released. The other end of the hose, the one holding Kate, disappeared over the edge in a flash. So quickly that the two girls had hardly noticed what had happened. "Katie!" both sisters yelled in unison as they scrambled to catch the end of the hose before it wasn't there. "Kate!" they shouted down into the empty hole. Her face hot with tears, Abbie swung around to the man with the black tie, who was putting the knife back in its sheath. "I hate you!" she charged at the man with her teeth bared, but the woman stepped forward and easily grabbed her wrists, pinning both of her arms to her sides and lifting her off the ground. Abbie kicked and screamed with the energy and ferocity of someone much larger than herself, but the woman had a surprisingly strong grip. The woman smiled. While Abbie continued to fight her way free, Sarah knelt beside the hole crying through her pigtails, which dangled over her face. "Katie! Katie!" The woman with the blue tie nodded at the black tie man, who went over and scooped Sarah up into his arms without much care, like he was picking up someone else's dirty laundry. Abbie had exhausted herself and was dangling limp, not knowing what to do. Her head was swimming. What was happening? Where were her parents? What was this hole doing there? Was Kate dead? Was she alive? What's going on? Abbie desperately wanted to see her mother and father. She had nothing but questions. However, one thought rose above them all. We've got to get away from these guys. Blue tie woman seemed to be in charge. She spoke quickly into her suit cuff. Abbie couldn't hear everything she said, but she did hear her say, "We have 2 of them." 2 of us. "Sarah!" Abbie shouted over at her younger sister, who was whimpering and crying to herself as she dangled from the arm of the black tie guy. "Sarah!" This time Abbie looked up. "Quiet," said blue tie woman in her cold voice. "Sarah!" Abbie hissed. "Quiet, I said." Blue tie woman gave Abbie a short shake for emphasis. Abbie didn't acknowledge the warning and called out again. "Sarah, we need to do thumbs. We need to do it now." Sarah looked confused, but just as she was about to ask Abbie what she meant, Abbie twisted herself around in Blue Tie Woman's grasp and jabbed her thumb as hard as she could into the middle of the woman's throat. The woman hadn't expected this, and she gasped. Her face seemed to turn a shade of purple and blue, like a film that rippled up and down. It wasn't a crippling blow by any means, but it had a much bigger effect than Abbie was hoping for. Startled and struggling to breathe, the Blue Tie Woman loosened her grip. Abbie put her arms straight up over her head and made herself like a noodle, slipping out of the woman's grasp. Her feet on the ground, she immediately launched herself at the black tie man, causing him to stumble backwards over the water hose and let go of Sarah. One of his feet slipped over the edge of the hole. He fell to his knees and scrambled away from it. "Come on, Sarah!" Abbie grabbed her sister by the back of her shirt and propelled her forward, just missing the edge of the hole herself, and they took off around the side of the house. "Run, Sarah, run!" The girls weren't sure if the two mysterious people in the blue suits were coming after them, but they didn't have to wait long to find out. "There!" Black Tie Guy shouted as he rounded the back corner, his face twisted in anger. "There they go!" Well, I hope you're enjoying the story so far. There's lots more to go. We're only reading 10 out of the first 56 chapters so far. And I hope that you'll visit the website, thenomies.com, because there you'll find all kinds of fun things. There's a puzzle that has to do with the story. You can even follow the girls' route all the way from Moncton to Matsumoto and see Matsumoto Castle yourself on Google Maps. All kinds of things. So visit thenomies.com, enjoy the rest of the story, and now let's get back to it. Chapter 3, Kate. "Pull me up!" Kate shouted above the wind. Once Kate realized she had gone down farther than she intended, she tried not to panic about not being able to get back up. Neither one of her sisters was very big. Or strong, she thought. "Hey, pull me up!" Their faces disappeared from view, then there was a slight movement in her hands. The hose started moving upwards in short, jerky stages. It was hard to hold on with her sweaty hands. She could feel tears welling up in her eyes. She was scared now. Just as she was about to shout again, there was a sharp tug on the hose. The rest happened so fast. For a moment, Kate felt weightless. Then her worst fear came true. She was falling. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Sarah's face appeared briefly above her, but it became smaller and smaller until she couldn't see it at all, or the opening of the hole. Free-falling, Kate tumbled down, down, down into the darkness. The rush of the wind and the increasing volume of the thrumming pushed her screams back into her mouth and into her stomach. Am I going to die? Her mind was filled with images of her parents, sisters, and friends, and then a more immediate concern. Will it hurt? As these thoughts ran through her mind and sadness wrapped around her like a crushing blanket, Kate didn't notice that she was starting to slow down. The farther down the hole she got, the stronger the wind got, until the force of the wind coming up equaled the speed at which she was falling. Kate came to an almost complete standstill in mid-air. The wind was so loud and so strong that it took Kate a few moments to realize that she wasn't falling anymore, but rather almost hovering. What the? If she stretched her arms and legs straight out like a starfish, she could stay in place. She got scared, though, and brought her limbs back in, wrapping her arms around herself. But as soon as she did this, she began to descend once more, slowly tumbling over and over. Come on, you can do this, she said out loud. Kate took a deep breath and pushed her arms and legs out again. It took a little time for her to right herself, but she did it. Arms out, hover. Arms in, fall. She could even make herself go up a few feet depending upon how she curved her body. This is crazy. Kate's mind was racing. It was hard to see anything through the tears that were streaming up her face because of the wind. She clenched her eyes tight, then peeked out through one eye. She could just make out a kind of shape on the wall on the other side of the tunnel. Is that an opening? Kate knew she needed to get over there to investigate, or be stuck forever hovering. But how? Jutting out her chin, as if pointing where to go, produced no result. Next, she tried flapping her arms like a bird, but that just made her feel sick to her stomach as she went up and down in place like a yo-yo. She tried swimming towards the opening, but that had the same effect as flapping her arms. So finally, she tried simply reaching out with one hand, but that caused her to spin and took some time to right herself and not throw up. Nothing was working. Kate's arms were getting tired, but every time she brought them in to rest, she would start to fall again. I can't do it. I just can't, she said to no one other than herself, as she slowly rolled over and over, sinking farther and farther down into the darkness, her exhausted arms hanging limp by her sides. Chapter 4. Abbie and Sarah. There they are! Crap! Run, Sarah! Abbie grabbed her younger sister again by the back of her t-shirt and catapulted her towards the narrow path that led down into the park across the street. It was their only chance. Go, Sarah, go! Abbie was almost dragging her now. The two attackers in blue suits straightened their ties as they quickened their pace to follow the girls. The steep path that led down into the woods was greasy in sections after last night's rain. This side, Sarah. Abbie knew her way around the slippery sections. Still clutching Sarah's shirt, she dragged Sarah this way and that, avoiding the mud, but unfortunately not the thick, prickly branches that jabbed into the path. At the bottom, Abbie yanked Sarah backwards. Ducking low, they ran along the creek bed towards the open drainage pipe that stuck out of the embankment. Abbie could hear their two chasers stumbling and cursing their way down the slippery slope. Their smooth-soled dress shoes were not the best footwear for a chase in the woods, but slipping or not, they were coming. For them. In here, Abbie whispered to Sarah. I'm not going into the poop chute. Shh! Sarah, be quiet. Abbie glared at her sister to make sure she understood. Then grabbing Sarah's waist, Abbie boosted her up towards the opening of the pipe. The girls loved exploring the park with their dad, and the drainage pipe was a popular stop. Their dad had explained that all the water from the streets above drained into the creek through the big concrete pipe. To the girls, it looked like a cave, begging to be investigated. To discourage them from trying to climb in, their dad told them that a dog turd would occasionally find its way into the pipe and get stuck inside the opening. You never knew what you might put your hand on when you reached in to pull yourself up. Gross, said Sarah. She touched the wet, mossy edge of the pipe. Moisture seeped through her t-shirt as she gingerly crawled in, fearful of what she might touch. Come on, Sarah, move! Abbie hoisted herself in after Sarah and reached out to pull some of the surrounding branches around the opening. Do you think there are any turds in here? Sarah whispered. No, of course not. Dad was just saying that. No, said Sarah. What's that smell? Sarah, did you just fart? I had to, she whimpered. Abbie was about to lay into her sister when she heard their two chasers walking close by. She signaled to Sarah to be silent. She could see them through the branches. But the woman was talking into the cuff of her suit again. Negative. We do not have them, but they are close. They cannot have gone far. We will keep looking. Abbie could see that black tie guy had his curved knife out, and she suddenly felt cold. Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. Sarah sensed her big sister's fear and sat motionless on her haunches as a thin stream of water passed between her feet. She was staring at a clump of wet leaves, but in the dim light, it looked like something else. She shifted away from it and bumped into Abbie, almost causing her to fall forward out of the pipe. Sarah! Abbie hissed as she wheeled around to face her little sister. Smarten up! Afraid that they might have been heard, the girls froze, hardly daring to breathe. 5 minutes passed, although it felt like forever. I think they're gone, Abbie whispered to Sarah. She shuffled to the edge of the pipe and leaned out as far as she dared, straining to hear anything. Nothing. Okay, Sarah, here's the plan. We've got to get back to the house to see if Mom and Dad are somewhere, but we can't go the way we came because those people might be there watching. We'll go back up the street a little further down, just like we do when we play hide-and-go-seek. Sarah stared blankly at Abbie. Abbie knew this was not a good sign. That meant Sarah was tired and was soon going to have one of her infamous meltdowns. We don't have time for that, not now, Abbie thought. Come on, Sarah, don't give me that look. We need to get home. With that, Abbie turned onto her stomach and slid out of the pipe, dropping to the ground as softly as possible. The cold water trickling out of the pipe seeped through her t-shirt, making her shiver. Abbie stretched out her arms, and Sarah inched forward on her bum until her little legs dangled over the edge. As usual, she was wearing 2 different socks. With a hesitant push, She fell awkwardly into Abbie, and the two of them spilled onto the ground. Glancing around to make sure nobody had heard them, they crouched low, hand in hand, and began creeping along the bank of the creek that ran along the edge of their neighborhood. Just a little farther ahead was another path back up to the street. It came out in the backyard of Mrs. Constance's house, just a few houses away from theirs. Abbie had discovered it while looking for frogs last spring. It was quite overgrown, which would help them keep hidden. Sarah's hand suddenly slipped out of Abbie's. When Abbie turned, she saw that her little sister was almost at her limit. She decided to sit in the tall grass beside the stream, arms crossed and chin down. The classic first position of meltdown. Oh boy, thought Abbie. Come on, Sarah. I just want to go home, Abbie. I know, that's what we're doing, dummy. Sarah's face showed that she didn't appreciate being called a dummy. Trying to hide her exasperation, Abbie crouched down beside Sarah and gave her a little squeeze. Come on, like we're almost there. Look, the bottom of the path is just over there. She pointed to an opening in the bushes ahead of them. Once we get to the top, we just have to cross Mrs. Constance's lawn in the back. And then we can crawl along the bottom of the hedge to the sidewalk and see if those turds are still around. If not, we're home free. Turds. Sarah allowed herself a little smile. That was enough to break the spell. She reluctantly got up with the help of her sister, and the two of them soon disappeared into the hole in the bushes, making their way up the secret path to their neighbor's backyard. At the top, the girls crouched low and ran across the lawn to the thick, tall hedge between the houses. Then they scrambled on their hands and knees, following the bottom of the hedge towards the street. Abbie stopped just before the sidewalk and glanced back at Sarah. She took a breath and slowly peered around the end of the hedge towards their house. She froze. Her view was blocked by a pair of muddy black dress shoes and the pant legs of a light blue suit. What do you see? Sarah wanted to know. Do you see the turds? Abbie turned quickly to Sarah, putting her fingers to her lips. Abbie, what do you see? Abbie's stomach flipped with fear. She widened her eyes at Sarah, silently pleading for her to be quiet. Abbie, what? Sarah went silent as she saw Black Tie Guy's long, curved knife push through the branches at the bottom of the hedge, followed by his cold, smiling face. Why, hello, girls. Chapter 5. Kate. Kate didn't know how far she had sunk in the semi-floating state. Eyes closed tight, her mind raced through all the kinds of terrible possibilities of what might happen. She forced her eyes open, staring into the blackness and trying to think. Wait, what? There, she saw it again. Almost every 15 seconds or so, there was a faint lighter spot, about the size of a car, slowly inching up the wall as she went down. The spot was so faint that Kate wondered if she was imagining things. She rubbed her eyes and squinted, trying to bring the shapes into focus. Hope slowly started to burn in her chest, like the last ember of a small fire getting some new air. There was something more than just blackness down here. With a rush of energy, Kate shot her arms and legs out like a starfish once again, her previous fatigue forgotten. She wanted to hold herself in place so she could focus on the wall. It was so difficult to see through the tears caused by the rush of wind. She pulled her right arm in and wiped her eyes with the back of one hand. Much to her surprise, when she did that, she pitched down a bit in that direction, and forward too. What the? She tried with the other arm. The same reaction. A smile started to spread across her face. I can fly, she thought. By bringing her arms in, or putting one out farther, or pulling one or both of her legs closer to herself, she found that she could maneuver quite effectively around the small space, so long as she kept her tummy facing down. Ha! Kate shouted above the wind, then set to work. Adjusting her arms, she advanced, albeit slowly, towards the wall. Stretching her hand out, she could feel the cool earth slide past underneath her fingertips. She allowed herself to drift gently down towards the next faint spot below her, enjoying the sensation of touching something, even if it was only the hard-packed dirt wall of a bottomless hole. When she reached the spot, she could feel some kind of hard bump against her fingertips, Then the dirt was gone, replaced by open air and what looked like a small pinpoint of light in the distance. Then it was dark, and her fingers felt dirt again. Huh? The spot was an opening. The ember in her chest began to burn brighter. Kate steadied herself, trying not to let her excitement throw her off balance. She let her fingers gently play over the surface of the wall as she gradually approached the next faint spot far below, her excitement growing with every inch. When she finally arrived, she had the same experience. She could feel a hard, curved edge surrounding the emptiness, too deliberate to be a natural feature. Then a pinpoint of light, and then back to feeling dirt. It could only mean one thing. Someone or something must have made it, and it was a way out. Think. Kate's mind raced as the next opening got closer. I have to get in, she thought, and started to panic. She shook her head. Get a grip on yourself. Then an idea popped into her head. Grip. She had a plan. As the next opening approached, Kate stretched herself out as much as possible to slow herself down. When her fingers felt the bump along the edge of the opening, she gripped it as hard as she could, took a deep breath, and tucked her knees in towards her chest, using the momentum to swing her hips down towards the opening. Then, at just the right moment, she shot her legs out in front of her and released her grip. Kate's feet flew straight through the air into nothingness like she was on an invisible slide of air. A few seconds later, she landed hard on the ground, skidding to a stop. And just like that, it was over. She was out of the hole and in a tunnel instead. Kate took a long, deep breath and another. As her heart rate slowed, her shoulders slumped, and she let out a hoarse chuckle. And then, as the rush of everything that had just happened reached her brain, she rolled over and started to cry. Chapter 6. Sarah, Abbie, Constance. Hello, girls, said the black tie man as he crouched under the hedge with a threatening smile, his face so close they could smell his breath. Time to go. Abbie and Sarah were so shocked they couldn't move. Black tie guy casually slid his knife back into its sheath beneath his coat and grabbed the two girls by the scruffs of their necks, dragging them out from under the hedge just as the blue tie woman appeared. She wore the same chilling smile. Let go, Sarah said, trying to wiggle away. I want to go home. I want to see my mom and dad. Let go. Black tie man held the girls fast in his iron grip. Where is everyone? Sarah thought. Why isn't anyone helping? Abbie was wondering the same thing. Just then, their neighbor, Mrs. Constance, came out of her house and walked down her driveway on the opposite side of the lawn from the hedge and turned left on the sidewalk, coming towards them. The girls didn't know much about her, other than she walked around their neighborhood several times a day, always with her headphones on. They had always guessed that she was in her late 60s because of her white hair, but she looked much younger now that they were seeing her up close. Hi, girls, Mrs. Constance said cheerily, not seeming to notice that the girls were being held prisoner by Black Tie Guy. Sarah was about to yell for help when she felt something dig into her side. She winced as the sharp tip of the knife broke her skin. Say hello, girls, Black Tie Guy said. Not nice to be rude. Oh, I hardly think these girls are rude. I've known them for years, always very chatty. Are you not, girls? The look on Mrs. Constance's face was hard to read. She often looked at them as she walked past their house, but she never said hello. So why was she acting so friendly now? Yes, Sarah said, sensing this was the right answer. Of course you are. Such lovely girls. Mrs. Constance continued with a big smile, like they were old friends. And you are growing so fast, I cannot believe it. She stepped towards the girls as if to inspect them. Their blue-suited captors shifted their feet, and Black Tie Guy drew the girls in tight. The knife under his coat pressed a little harder against Sarah's ribs. She closed her eyes, trying not to cry. We are just taking the girls home, The blue-tie woman said. Their parents asked us to bring them back to do their homework, she smiled. Mrs. Constance didn't appear to be listening. Instead, she was looking over their shoulders at something, or someone, in the distance behind them. With a very slight nod in that direction, she turned back to the girls, flashing him her biggest smile yet as she knelt down in front of them. She smelled like Laurie, their bus driver. Fresh bread. Not like the stink of the person holding them. Well now, Mrs. Constance said, you two best get going with your friends here and get to that homework. As she stood up and slid her headphones on, Mrs. Constance appeared to lose her balance, leaning in towards Sarah for a brief second as she put her hand down to catch herself. Scream when I say now, Mrs. Constance whispered to her, winking. What was that? Blue-tie woman asked. Oh, nothing, Mrs. Constance replied as she straightened up. With another subtle nod into the distance, Mrs. Constance turned to Sarah, looked at her rather plainly, and said one word. Now. Everything came together for the perfect meltdown. Sarah was scared, tired, and hungry. She didn't know why her mom wasn't at the bus stop. She didn't know what had happened to their backyard. She didn't know what had happened to Kate, and she didn't like this stranger holding her so tightly with a knife to her side. Letting loose the storm that had been building up inside her all day, Sarah breathed in deeply and let out a high-pitched shriek that could have broken glass. Sarah, stop! Abbie winced, shrugging her shoulders to her ears. At the sound of Sarah's scream, the two people in suits froze like statues, unable to move. Not sure what was happening, the girls wiggled out of the man's rigid arms and stood beside Mrs. Constance. As they looked at their captors, the only movement they saw was coming from the same weird bluish-purple color rolling up and down their faces, like it had when Abbie jabbed the blue-tie woman with her thumb in the backyard. Mrs. Constance whipped off her headphones and knelt down again before the girls. I don't have time to explain. She spun them around and pointed to the house at the end of the street. Do you see that house? The one with the stone front? The girls knew it. It was a grand-looking European-style house set back behind a large stand of trees. There was a semicircular driveway that curved into the stand on one side and out the other. The girls had made up lots of stories about who might live there, but they never saw anyone come or go. Abbie and Sarah nodded at Mrs. Constance. Good. I need you to run there as fast as you can. Do not stop. Before the girls could move, Mrs. Constance took Sarah's shoulders and turned her back around, looking her square in the eye, much the same way Sarah's mom had done that very morning. Sarah, you did a great job. You are very brave, and I know you are small and tired, but small can be powerful. I need you to continue to be brave. Can you do that for me? Sarah nodded, looking like she'd rather cry than be brave. Good. You and your sister have about 5 minutes before these two, she motioned with her head towards the immobile people, come to. And when they do, well, they will not be happy. You both need to get to that house. You'll be safe there. But they must not see where you went, so you need to get there before they can turn around. Do you understand? Sarah didn't speak. Do you understand? Mrs. Constance said again. Her voice was urgent and hard. Abbie spoke up. Yeah, we do. Come on, Sarah. Let's go. For the third time that day, Abbie grabbed Sarah and pushed her to run as fast as her little legs could go. Run! Mrs. Constance shouted at them. You only have a few minutes! Abbie glanced over her shoulder to see Mrs. Constance pulling out her own knife from under her jacket. She brought it up in a smooth arc in front of her face and stood at the ready for the two people to come back to life. Mrs. Constance needed information, and she was going to get it. The house was farther than it looked. Abbie's legs were burning, so she couldn't imagine how Sarah must be feeling. I can't, Abbie. Can we walk? Sarah pleaded, scrambling behind her sister. No, Sarah, you can do it. Abbie had been counting in her head, and she knew that the two people, or whatever they were going to wake up any second now. They weren't running fast enough. She managed to find another gear and ran so hard that spots were starting to form in the front of her eyes. She held tight to Sarah's hand, and her sister's feet were barely touching the ground. They were almost there. Halfway down the driveway, Abbie saw the heavy wooden front door open, and a familiar-looking woman stepped out. She was tall and thin with thick dark hair, younger looking than Mrs. Constance. She held out her hand and spoke in a commanding voice. "Hurry!" The girls hardly had time to set foot on the landing before the woman whisked them inside and slammed the door shut with a house-shaking thud. Chapter 7. Kate. Kate was exhausted and had no more tears to shed. Her whole body hurt from landing on the cold, hard floor. She opened her bleary eyes. It was too dark to see anything, but she could hear the sound of the wind racing up the hole behind her. Rolling onto her side, she pushed herself up into a sitting position and tried to wrap her mind around what had just happened. She could recall what happened, but not how it happened. Now she was here, wherever here was. Kate hugged her knees up to her chest and let the last few tears run down her cheeks as she sat, not knowing what to do. Wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, she noticed that pinpoint of light coming from somewhere far in the distance. It was faint, but it was real. It was enough to snap Kate out of her misery. She started to crawl towards the light, anything to get away from the hole she just escaped from. Maybe I'll find some food too, she thought as her stomach rumbled. She had to stop and rest a few times. The tunnel was unusually long and straight as an arrow. Bit by bit, though, the light grew bigger, and she could start to see the end of the tunnel. She could make out some sounds now, too. Not natural sounds, like a gurgling brook or the wisp of the wind, but industrial sounds, the sound of machines. As Kate got closer to the tunnel's opening, she could feel fear starting to seep into her bones. She slowed her pace and instinctively pressed her back against the wall, making herself as small as she could, not wanting to be seen by whoever or whatever was out there. She inched along sideways until she came to within a few feet of the opening, then lay flat on her stomach, wiggling forward to peer out into the light. What she saw was equal parts wondrous and terrifying. There, laid out in front of her, or below her, more like, was a huge city of sorts, stretching as far as the eye could see. This is impossible. I must have hit my head harder than I thought. Kate looked around, trying to take in the strange sight. The city was enclosed within smooth, sand-colored walls that slowly curved off into the distance. The walls were full of tunnels, some higher up than Kate's and some lower. Some had poles extending from them that ran down to the ground, while others didn't. Looking up, Kate couldn't see a ceiling, only a faint light that illuminated everything from somewhere up above. In front of her, buildings stretched as far as she could see. Smaller ones gave way to larger ones towards the underground horizon. Kate could make out what looked like little bridges extending out of every story, connecting the buildings together in an endless stone web. She was most impressed, though, by the intricate water system, which threaded its way through the buildings and the grassy patches between them, like a giant moat. The water danced with light that appeared to be coming from within itself. From where Kate was, the whole city looked like a massive train set on a table, except that the people in the trains were moving on their own. Kate started to feel dizzy and see bright spots in front of her eyes. She realized that, in her excitement, she had forgotten to breathe. She gulped in a huge breath and let it out slowly. Wow. The air had a slight metallic taste to it. More curious than scared now, she wanted a closer look. She knew she couldn't get home by herself and would need some help. Maybe someone down there would know how I can get back, she thought. But how do I get down there? Her eyes cast around, looking for something or some way to reach the bottom. Maybe one of those, she said out loud, shrinking back at the sound of her own voice echoing off the inside of the tunnel. Kate was looking at the poles. Each one had a round steel plate at its base on the ground. Kate watched in fascination as someone stepped onto one of the platforms and it triggered a metal sleeve to rise up between their feet like an expanding telescope, right up to head height. The person grabbed the metal sleeve with one hand, and then the platform started to move up the pole. When the person reached the tunnel entrance, they let go of the metal sleeve, the platform stopped, and the person, was it a person, stepped off into the tunnel. Cool, thought Kate. She was excited to give it a try. She looked around for the pole by her tunnel, but there wasn't one. The closest one was about 30 feet over and 20 feet down. Her heart sank. Looking around for another way, Kate noticed that there were cables or clear hoses running along the walls between the tunnels, forming a crisscross grid like a kind of giant netting. The cables glowed brightly, and the whole grid system provided enough light for the entire city. There wasn't a pole by her tunnel entrance, but there was a cable. Maybe I could slide across the cable and down to the other tunnel with the pole, just like in the movies. Can't be that hard, she thought. But how? She murmured. Then she smiled. She had just the thing. Her house key was clipped to her belt loop with a mountain climbing carabiner. Reaching up on her tiptoes and gripping the side of the tunnel with one hand, Kate leaned out as far as she dared and clipped the carabiner around the cable that led towards the tunnel she was aiming for. Then she threaded her nylon web belt through the steel clip and wrapped each end of the belt around her wrists. That should do it, Kate said through clenched teeth. She made the mistake of glancing down and her stomach did a flip. She was scared, but she knew turning back would get her, literally, nowhere. The only way out was down and over, and she needed to get there without drawing any attention to herself, at least until she could figure out who those people were and whether they were friendly or not. She took a few deep breaths and shook her head, trying to summon more courage. Okay, here we go. Her tongue sticking out in concentration, Kate stepped off the ledge. She slid smoothly for about the first 15 feet, but then the cable started to sag under her weight. It was meant to illuminate, not carry people. Kate started to panic. Would it break? The more the cable sagged, the slower Kate moved until she came to a complete halt just 3 feet from her targeted tunnel entrance. No. Kate's arms were tired. It was a good thing she had wrapped the ends of the belt around her wrists, or she would have fallen by now, her hands too weak and sweaty to hold on any longer. She started to swing her feet towards the opening. With each back and forth, the carabiner slid forward a few inches, then back one. It was slow going, but she was getting there. One more swing. She managed to skim the edge of the tunnel with her toe, but her foot slipped off. She didn't know if she had enough force to try again, but with one final effort, she got her foot into the tunnel. She paused for a few seconds to give her arms a rest. As she felt herself relax, she let her gaze drop. Seeing nothing but empty space between her and the hard ground below, she panicked. Her foot slipped off the edge, pushing her backwards to where she was dangling once more. No, she cried, furious with herself. No, don't look down. There's the cable. Get your foot back on. Grab the cable. Pull yourself in. Kate heard a noise and dared to look down. Someone was getting on the platform below. Afraid that she might have been spotted, Kate swung herself forward again towards the tunnel entrance with a new burst of adrenaline. She managed to hook one of her feet onto the ledge of the tunnel. She held fast for a minute, her heavy breathing sounding like a freight train as it echoed off the smooth, cool wall surrounding the city. She had to let go of the belt now, at least with one hand, so she could pull herself into the tunnel with the other. Kate managed to transfer both ends of the belt into one hand, but her hand was sweaty, and the belt started to slide slowly through her fingers. She frantically felt around with her free hand for something to grab onto inside the tunnel, her fingers dancing all around the inside edge, searching, and her toes digging hard to keep her in place. The belt slipped through her fingers and her arms dropped, no longer able to stay up, just as she got a solid grip on a cable inside. Oof. Kate let out another large breath and tried to steady herself. She stayed there motionless for a moment, one arm and leg in the tunnel, the other arm and leg dangled outside. She'd made it. Unbelievable, she thought, and then remembered the person coming up the pole. Her senses were on high alert. There was no time to celebrate. Crouching low, Kate pressed herself into the shadow cast by a utility box on the tunnel wall and waited, willing every part of her body to get smaller in the darkness around her. She could hear a soft friction sound, like someone rubbing the palms of their hands together very quickly. It got louder and faster as the platform approached. Stepping off the platform, the person hesitated for a second, as if they heard a sound they weren't expecting. Apparently satisfied that all was as it should be, they headed down the dark corridor of the tunnel. As they walked, lights came on to light their path, turning off behind them once they passed. Kate's eyes went wide. Under their light, their skin seemed blue. What the? Once the person was just a speck in the distance, Kate uncoiled herself from her hiding spot and inched her way towards the edge of the tunnel. The platform had already returned to the bottom of the pole, and she couldn't see any mechanism to summon it back up. Kate peered farther over the edge, grabbing the pole to steady herself. Instantly, the pole felt warm, and a blue band appeared beneath Kate's hand. It pulsed once, and then Kate could see the platform ascend towards her. It only took a few seconds for the thin metal platform to zip up and stop level with her feet. She wasn't sure what to do next. The blue band beneath her hand began to pulse faster, getting darker with each pulse. Like a countdown, Kate thought. Sensing that if she didn't move, she'd miss her ride, Kate jumped on. She grabbed onto the center sleeve as she had seen the other person do, and the platform started its descent. Kate watched wide-eyed as the city below rose up before her. She wondered when, or even how, she would ever get back home. Chapter 8, Mrs. Constance. Mrs. Constance studied the two statues in front of her. Funny, she thought as she flipped the blue women's tie over her shoulder using the tip of her knife, how a scream like that can freeze our kind like this. The blue tie was significant. Only supervisors wore blue ties, and Mrs. Constance needed to know why these agents were here and what they knew. She stole a quick glance over their shoulders towards the stone house to make sure the girls had got there. But before she could be sure, she felt a blinding pain in the side of her neck. The two agents in front of her had come around faster than she anticipated. She knew better than to break focus. Now she'd pay for it. The first blow was followed by a foot to her stomach. The force knocked her backwards and onto her rump. Without hesitation, the agents lunged at her with arms outstretched. Mrs. Constance didn't hesitate either. She shot out both hands and with a vice-like grip, clamped onto their wrists and pulled hard. They didn't expect this, and they landed hard on the concrete, face first. Pivoting as she got to her feet, Mrs. Constance deftly switched her hands on their wrists and yanked them hard back towards her. You could hear the pop-pop as their shoulders dislocated. She kept pulling until the two blue-suited agents were uncomfortably close to her face. Then, with one succinct crack of her forehead, she knocked them both unconscious. She had to steady herself for a moment. It was a good move, but a little hard on the head. With a slow stretch of her neck, Mrs. Constance looked down at the two agents lying on the sidewalk. Still got it. She thought herself a smile. Her ears heard what came next, but her brain didn't register the source of the sound before her pain sensors exploded. Ah! Mrs. Constance fell to the ground and rolled over on her side. A knife was sticking out of her thigh. There was a third blue-suited goon coming towards her. But normally they only travel in pairs, she thought. If there was a third agent, then there must be a fourth nearby. Hello, love. The third agent loomed over her, smirking as he pulled the knife out of her leg with a twist. Mrs. Constance blanched white at the pain but didn't make a sound. She just glared and took a short, quick breath to stay under control. The knife hadn't hit anything serious, no bones or major arteries, but she was going to lose blood, and a fair amount if she didn't stop the bleeding soon. She sat up and pulled off a cord from around her belt and began to tie it into a tourniquet. The third man said, flashing an oily smile. There'll be none of that now. His hair was longer and slicked back. She didn't like him. We'll just have to let nature take its course, unless you want to tell us where the little darlings went, and who has them. Little chance of that happening, Mrs. Constance replied rather matter-of-factly, still trying to control her breathing. Have it your way, I guess. We'll just have to sit and enjoy the view then. You can if you want, she replied. Here, hold this. She held out the cord, and the man instinctively reached out to take it. He caught himself, but it was a fraction too late. Mrs. Constance threw a handful of dirt from the sidewalk into the man's face, and even though he had sunglasses on, he still closed his eyes for a second. That was all the time she needed. She shot her legs out and up, and her ankles landing expertly on either side of the man's neck just as the dirt hit his sunglasses. The pain in her leg was incredible, but the adrenaline was stronger. With a quick twist of her hips, she flipped the man over, spraining his neck in the process. She crouched above him. He wasn't going anywhere, but he was still conscious. When is it happening? When? Mrs. Constance had the agent by the lapels of his suit jacket, but he just smiled his oily smile and blacked out. She didn't know where the fourth man was, but he had to be close. She quickly took out a small plastic vial of orange liquid from her fanny pack. She stuck the pointed tip an inch into the wound and squeezed. Then she dragged it across the top of the cut. The pain was excruciating, and her head began to swirl. Whew! That'll wake you up in the morning, she said aloud to distract herself. Not wasting any time, Mrs. Constance quickly tied the cord around her leg as the liquid began to solidify and numb the wound. She grabbed the oily, smiling man by the back of his suit jacket and dragged him along the bottom of the hedge, launching him unceremoniously down the same path Abbie and Sarah had come up just 15 minutes earlier. She could hear his limp body crumple and bounce off who knew what as it tumbled down the steep ravine. Though she was trained to remain neutral in such situations, she couldn't help enjoying the sound of his pinball-like descent. Mrs. Constance limped back to the sidewalk as the numbness started to set in. The other two agents were coming around. She knelt down and swiftly knocked them out again with the butt of her knife. Then she grabbed each one by an ankle and dragged them rather carelessly over to the path, where she sent them on their way down to join their friend. Now, where is number 4? She mused, her eyes darting in every direction. Mrs. Constance weighed her options. She could look for the fourth agent and try to extract some information about when exactly things were going to happen, or she could return to the safe house and tell them what she knew so far. She didn't know much, but she did know that it had started, and it was time to put their own plan into play. Checking that nobody was watching, Mrs. Constance straightened her jacket and headed for the stone house at the end of the street. She tried to appear casual as she walked. 50 meters to go. Mrs. Constance, someone shouted. Mrs. Constance! Mrs. Sobalski stood on her front steps, waving desperately. She had been trying for years to get Mrs. Constance to join her youth-enhancing skin cream pyramid scheme. Mrs. Constance, you're limping. A little arthritis setting in? Yes, something like that, Mrs. Constance replied, trying not to wince at the throbbing in her leg. Well, you're in luck. I've got a new line of herbal vitamins from Kenya that might help. Kenya, is that so? Mrs. Constance feigned mild interest, her eyes scanning the streets for signs of movement. Yes, indeed. The marathon runners swear by it. How about I give you a few samples? I reckon we could make a small fortune selling them to all the old folks around here. Her eyes sparkled behind her thick glasses. Mrs. Constance almost let out a sigh of relief when she saw the fourth man appear around the corner on the sidewalk. He must have been covering the other side of the street. Edna, I'm sorry to interrupt, but a bear has been spotted in the park, a big bear, and he is hungry and dangerous. You need to go inside and lock your doors. Lock my doors? Can bears open doors? This one can. You best go now. Mrs. Sobalski had more questions, but Mrs. Constance was already on the move. Mrs. Sobalski thought. What a strange woman. She went back inside and locked her doors, for good measure. The driveway to the stone house was just feet away, but Mrs. Constance couldn't let the fourth man see her walk down it in case he figured out who she was. Right now, she was just a neighbor out for a walk, and she needed to keep it that way. Her leg was making it difficult to keep a normal stride, though. Mrs. Constance adjusted the zip of her jacket, hoping the movement would distract the agent from noticing the blood that was starting to seep through her pants and the cord tied around her thigh. The man looked up, and Mrs. Constance nodded to him pleasantly. As she had hoped, he'd acknowledged her with a greasy sort of smile, but kept walking. Mrs. Constance relaxed her shoulders. She would circle the block, cut through the woods, and use the secret entrance around the back of the house. Or at least, that was the plan. Mrs. Constance heard the man's footsteps stop behind her. She slowed enough to hear him say, "Hello, love." "Run or turn?" She turned. "Pardon me?" Then she saw him. One of the 3 agents she had thrown down the ravine had made his way back up. He was on his hands and knees with blood running down his face and his glasses broken, but he was yelling and pointing at her. Coming up behind him were the 2 other blue suits. "Run," the voice inside her head was adamant. Chapter 9. The Stone House. 10 years ago, the big stone house was bought from a local businessman. He hadn't planned on selling, but when a tall woman with sunglasses appeared at his door offering him a sizable check, more than double what his property was worth, it took him about 10 seconds to agree. The woman offered a generous bonus if he would leave the furniture and be out in 48 hours. He was gone in 36. Since then, neighbors would occasionally see an expensive car or a large, dark SUV with tinted windows wheel into the driveway and then disappear into the attached carriage house. But they never saw anybody come or go through the front door. The smooth concrete sidewalk along the edge of the driveway had small stones embedded in it that absorbed light during the day and glowed blue-green at night, giving the whole property an other earthly feel. The girls were fascinated by this secrecy and often made up stories about who lived there, maybe a movie star or a duke or perhaps a baroness who held fancy parties with servants who wore white curly wigs and waistcoats and tails. Inside the house was nothing like they imagined. The tall woman now stood before a panting Abbie and Sarah inside the grand entrance. Another person was keeping watch through the thick glass of the front door. "Good job, Sarah," Abbie said, bent over with her hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. Her little sister managed a small smile. As Abbie's eyes adjusted to the dark interior, she looked up at the tall woman's face, but she wasn't sure her eyes were working properly. "Auntie Zaina?" she said. The woman, whose real name was just Zaina, smiled at being called Auntie. She knew Kate better than these 2, but she had been around their family often enough for the girls to recognize her. You live here?" Abbie asked. "Yes," Zaina responded. She could see that it was a lot for the girls to take in and looked at them with warm concern in her eyes. "You are okay now. I will explain everything once you have had a chance to catch your breath. What you need to know now is that you are safe." Zaina watched the girls as they looked around, their gaze attracted to the wall of large monitors in the room off the main foyer. "You can go in if you like." Zaina knew that time was not on their side, but she knew, too, that she needed the girls to cooperate. Abbie and Sarah cautiously stepped into the large room with all the screens. Desks filled the floor space, and large computer monitors covered one whole wall. Each screen showed a different place, a town square, a park, a field. The girls didn't recognize most of the places. Some of them looked like they could be in other countries, but then a familiar image caught Abbie's eye. "What the?" she said under her breath. There on the main screen, in the center of the wall, was a picture of their house. Zaina could see the girls were going to panic and quickly addressed them. "I cannot explain everything to you now, as we need to get ready to go." "Go?" the girls chirped together, turning back to Zaina. "Yes, but I will tell you what you need to know for now." She motioned to 2 large office chairs. "Please sit down. We do not have much time." Zaina glanced at the center screen as she finished her sentence. The girls sat. Sarah's legs didn't reach much farther than the edge of the seat. Even Abbie looked small and vulnerable in the oversized chair. Looking at both of the girls in turn, Zaina took in a breath and let it out and started to speak. I know that this will be hard to take in. Whether you understand it or not, the important thing is that you believe me. Okay? Can you do that? The girls nodded. Do you understand what evolution means? Abbie nodded, but Sarah stared. Zaina began. A long, long time ago, when humans were evolving into what they are today, another species was also evolving, called the Nomies. Now, think of it as two trains, side by side, if you will, each one on its own evolutionary track, one below ground and one above. She had their attention. Humans evolved to live above ground, learning how to hunt, fish, make fire, grow gardens, raise cattle, create buildings, and eventually cities. Zaina leaned a little closer, fixing the gaze of the young girls in front of her, not sure how much they were really understanding. The other species, the Nomies, learned to live in large caves underground. They had their own set of abilities that were suited to living below the surface. They learned how to grow plants and vegetables that did well in dark places. They used heat taken from the center of the earth, and they discovered how over the years to use bioluminescent plants, plants that glow in the dark, to create a living light source for their homes and cities. The girls stared at her, leaning forward, so she pressed on. Now, humans relied on things like oil and gas to power their machines, but the Nomies discovered the power of magnetic fields. In short, the Nomies' technology became far more advanced than what humans have developed on the surface. Zaina paused for a moment. The girls didn't blink, but she could see the wheels in their heads spinning, trying to keep up. Now, over time, some Nomies came to believe that there was another species who lived above them on the surface, but most Nomies thought that this was impossible. They saw the earth as their home, and other beings simply did not live on its roof. The girls smiled at this. Over the centuries, however, the Nomi scientists were finally able to reach the surface. Like in an elevator? Abbie asked. Not exactly, Zaina responded. They used a tunnel. It took a long time to make it. At least, it took a long time back then. When those Nomies reached the surface, they were amazed. They came back to report that the surface was as beautiful as it was different from their world. The Nomi explorers saw that the human civilization had developed much slower than theirs, especially when it came to science. Humans were still riding horses or even walking to get from place to place, while the Nomies beneath the surface were using vehicles powered by fuel made from plants. Many years ago, the Nomi leaders wanted to share what they knew, to teach their surface cousins how to live better. So a few were selected to go to the surface and help teach the humans. But it didn't work as planned. Why not? Both girls asked together. Well, in the beginning, the surface people believed the Nomies were gods. You mean like Spider-Man? Sarah asked. Not quite, Zaina winked at Abbie. No, the humans considered Nomies to be powerful beings because they knew how to do things the humans thought was magic. Really, it was just a better understanding of science, but it scared them. It did? The girls were now fully engaged in the story. Yes, and before too long, their fear turned to anger, and the people gathered into mobs and attacked the Nomies. Some were even killed. Killed? Sarah reached out for Abbie's hand, not taking her eyes off Zaina. Yes. Zaina paused for a moment before continuing. So the rest of the Nomies went back underground through their hidden tunnels, let things settle before coming to the surface again. Well, then what happened? Abbie asked, impatient to know more. Over the next few hundred years, Zaina responded, And in different places around the globe, the Nomies tried again to share their knowledge, but with little success. What? Why? Do people like riding horses that much? Sarah wanted to know. Zaina shook her head. It's not that simple. Then Abbie spoke. Are they still trying? Yes, but things have changed. The things that Nomies need to live underground, like water and soil, are slowly being ruined by what is happening on the surface. Over the last few decades, the damage that humans have done to their environment, things like creating explosions deep in the earth to release gas for their machines, is slowly poisoning the water and soil below ground. If it continues, Nomies will eventually be unable to grow any food or have fresh water to drink. Can't they just tell people what's going on? Abbie interrupted. They can come to my school and tell my class. My teacher is really concerned about the environment, and if she knew it was making problems for the Nomies, then... Zaina held up her hand, and Abbie stopped talking. Thank you, Zaina smiled, for that kind offer. But like many things, the problem is bigger than just one classroom. You see, now there are two groups of Nomies which have begun to form. She put her left hand out. There are those who want to reach out to the leaders on the surface, convince them of the need to change, and then show them how to do it so we can all exist. The other group, she put out her right hand, believes that the only way to save the Nomi civilization is to take over the surface and control all of it. She clenched her hand into a fist. Take over the surface? You mean like the whole world? Abbie asked, struggling to believe what she was hearing. Yes. Yes, the whole world and everyone in it. And if they do, it will not be good for you, me, or anyone else. Oh, was all Abbie could manage. She thought for a moment before asking. And how do you know all of this? Zaina paused to consider her options. Time wasn't on their side. They would need to leave soon. She glanced around the room to those watching the monitors and took in a breath. Because I am one. With that, she reached behind her head and she pulled her hands forward. Her hair and face slipped off, revealing smooth blue skin and dark blue hair that resembled soft, molded plastic. Ah! Abbie and Sarah screamed, almost tripping over backwards in their chairs. Scrambling to their feet, Abbie pushed Sarah behind her, looking for some way out. Get back! Abbie shouted. I'm warning you! I've been to Kate's taekwondo class. Zaina smiled. It's okay. You're okay. I'm not here to hurt you. She pulled her disguise back into place. I am here to protect you. And you see, this is why it's been so difficult to help surface dwellers. Because everyone reacts just as you did when you see something that you do not understand. Abbie kept Sarah behind her, her breathing still heavy, trying to decide whether she believed what Zaina was saying. Look, Zaina continued, her face now in place. The Nomies who chased you are part of the group that wants to take over. They have been planning this for a long time, and we believe they are going to attempt to take over very soon, especially given what happened at your house. Our house? You know what happened to our house? Abbie asked. Zaina pressed on. Yes, I do, but... She stopped mid-sentence. But what? Sarah asked. Zaina's eyes narrowed. She noticed a movement on the middle monitor, the one that showed the girl's house. She drew in a short breath. The girls turned to see what Zaina was seeing. The hole in the girl's backyard was getting smaller. It was closing. Katie! The girls cried out. Zaina's face blanched. I'm sorry, she said firmly. There's no time for further explanations. It's time to go. Now. Chapter 10. Latch 5. At 6 feet tall by surface measurements, Latch 5 was almost a foot taller than a usual Nomi. His size was intimidating, and he used it to his advantage. As head of the authoritative branch for Ward 5, Latch 5 held the third highest position in Nomi society. Only the leaders of the administrative and academic branches were more powerful. While each of the 8 wards had their own latch, Latch 5 was the one they all looked to for guidance. Latch 5 came to his position much faster than anyone else in Nomie history. Brains were generally preferred over brawn in their civilization, but Latch 5 had both. He believed the two were connected and that you couldn't have one without the other. He looked down, both literally and figuratively, on his colleagues. Latch 5's greatest strength was reading the mood of his citizens. He could see the small embers of anger burning stronger inside them each time they received a new report about how the surface dwellers were destroying the Nomies' environment. Poisonous liquids were starting to seep into their crystal clear water sources, which had remained pure for millions of years, all because the surface dwellers wanted more gas for their primitive machines. The possibility that the humans were doing so because they weren't aware of the Nomies' existence was irrelevant to Latch 5. He just knew that if he fanned the embers properly, the Nomies' slow-burning anger would turn into pure heat, a heat that he could direct towards his own purposes. There were a number of citizens across the 8 wards, a majority, really, Latch 5 liked to think, who wanted to prevent the destruction of their own civilization by taking control away from the surface dwellers, no matter what the cost. Latch 5 believed it was the only way. Having studied human behavior for decades, he knew that surface dwellers were too greedy and self-serving to change their ways voluntarily. They couldn't even accommodate differences of their own kind, so how could they possibly accept the idea of sharing resources with a whole new species living beneath their feet, even if it was one far more advanced than themselves? But not everyone agreed. Professor Flora, the head of the academic branch for Ward 5, took an opposite view. Latch 5 was tired of hearing her go on at every opportunity about social integration and sharing knowledge with the surface dwellers. The Latch tapped a pencil on his desk as he thought about it. He didn't like the amount of time the professor spent with his son, Fizat, who was softer than him and prone to idealistic ideas about listening to the people and keeping the peace. As far as Latch 5 was concerned, listening only got in the way of action, and it was time for action now. He hoped that Fizat wasn't swallowing Professor Flora's nonsense. The pencil he had been holding snapped, piercing his skin. No matter, he thought, examining the scratch on his hand and brushing away the broken pieces. Professor Flora will not be a problem much longer. More and more Nomies in positions of influence were starting to agree with Latch 5's way of thinking, and any of those who did question him soon found themselves working for free in a bioluminescent facility for 12 hours a day, or worse. Some members of the upper levels of their society would be furious once they discovered that Latch 5 had approved the launch of his surface protocol, but it didn't really matter. There was a large enough portion of the population who wanted the takeover to happen, and they'd be quite happy to silence those who didn't. Latch 5 smiled at the thought. Yes, it needed to happen to ensure their survival, and it was going to take someone like him to do it. His thoughts were interrupted by a short knock on his office door. Despite his importance and his large frame, Latch 5 had a smaller office than those who worked under him. He liked the feeling of being too big for the space. It made him feel even more powerful, like he was ready to burst at any moment, and he used that energy to get what he wanted. Come, Latch 5 said calmly. Latch 5. A thin Nomie entered and acknowledged Latch 5 with a curt nod. The Nomie didn't like being in Latch 5's office. There was little in the way of furniture or color. Just 4 walls painted with pale green bioluminescent paint. Latch 5's presence left little room for anyone else, or even air. Latch 5, the surface protocol is set and ready for your instructions. All suits are in place at the appropriate locations. There are 6 around the trial portal area waiting for the surface dweller children to come home from their place of education. Such as it was, he thought. Once they are in our control, they will be brought to wall number 6 as per your instructions. The thin Nomie snapped to attention with his arms straight down at his side, signaling the end of his report. Good, Latch 5 said. And Zaina? Latch 5 spoke her name in a clinical way while looking at the report in his hands, but the thin Nomi knew, as most did, that Zaina had been much closer to the Latch, as hard as that was to believe looking at him now. Back then, it was seen as a good match, one of them boasting self-made influence and power, the other coming from a well-known family in intellectual circles. However, an incident involving Zaina's father brought her family into disgrace. Zaina quickly fell out of favor in society and eventually went to work in some lower sections of the administrative branch. After several years of menial work, she was unexpectedly presented with an opportunity to work for the famed Professor Flora in the academic branch, sitting at a desk and watching a screen showing Nomi portals around the world, making sure they weren't detected by humans. It was hard to know if the Latch had what the surface dwellers called love for Zaina, or if he was simply obsessed with someone he couldn't control. Either way, he was waiting for an answer. The thin Nomi cleared his throat. We are not exactly sure of Zaina's location. We know that she is watching at least 3 of the portals closely. We believe she is observing the initial trial site. You believe? Yes. The smaller Nomi could feel the pressure building in the tight room. A quick wave of purple-blue scrolled across the Latch's face. I expect your we believe to become a we know by the end of the day. The Latch words seemed to suck the last bit of air out of the room. Yes, Latch 5. I will have the specifics of where she is to you shortly. With a final nod, the thin Nomi turned on his heels and exited the room, breathing deeply. Alone again, Latch 5 swiveled in his chair to look at the blank wall behind him. He tapped a button on the armrest and the image of the portal sites around the world appeared in front of him. His gaze stopped at the image of a stone house. There is still time for you to come back if you stop this effort of yours. He spoke out loud, his voice echoing around the tiny room as another wave of purple-blue ran up and down his face. Well, I hope you enjoyed that chapter. There are plenty more to go, so make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss what's coming up next. There's a lot more to come. And if you are enjoying it, by all means, feel free to share this with your family and friends so that you can watch and listen together. I'm Erik Gingles, the author of The Nomies and the Surface Protocol. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.